Ever wonder what really matters when it comes to practicing guitar? Why some players sound more musical with fewer notes? How to break through that wall when you feel stuck? After over 35 years teaching guitar professionally, I've heard just about every question under the sun, and today I'm answering 5 of the big ones. Hi, I'm Jon Finn. Welcome to this episode of Ask the Guitar Professor. I've spent more than 35 years teaching guitar at Berklee College of Music in Boston, and over the decades, certain questions kept coming up again and again. Questions that tell me what players are really struggling with and whether they're just getting started or already playing at a high level. Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 of the most common questions I've been asked and share the insights that have helped so many students move forward with clarity and confidence. Let's dive in. How do I get better at improvising? Well, improvising is a bit like storytelling, isn't it? So I think one of the things that I think about a lot is when I'm improvising, what story am I trying to tell? How do I want the audience to feel about what I'm playing? How do I know when I'm finished? Where do I want to start? Where do I want to end? Now, when you start improvising, one subject that often comes up is what scales do I play? What arpeggios, what techniques, what licks, things like that. And I think that when you're improvising, of course you want to think about those things, but I also feel like those elements of your playing should be kind of more automatic and should serve the overall mission of trying to tell the story. Like when you think about scales, for example, scales to me are like letters in the alphabet. So and you use letters in the alphabet to form words. You string words together to form thoughts. You string together thoughts to tell a story. So learning the elements like licks and scales and things like that are going to be helping you put together the overall story. So one song I bring up a lot with my students is a song called When the Saints Go Marching In. It's an old song, old jazz standard that was played way back in the day in New Orleans, and it was one of the original songs that the jazz musicians would use as a vehicle for improvisation. And my understanding of the way that it started was bands would get together and they would march down the street playing whatever song, and then they'd have to kind of play it over and over and over while they're marching from miles down the street. And after playing the song 40 times, they're starting to get tired of it, so they start sort of naturally kind of putting these little flourishes into it. So, you think about this, the song When the Saints Go Marching In, the melody goes like this. That melody would get played over and over and over and over again. Then pretty soon the trumpet player, for example, might start playing. So he's still more or less playing the melody, but kind of putting these little flourishes in. The clarinet player might answer with something like this. So you can hear the melody going on, but you can also hear the little flourishes in between, and that would get taken further and further and further, and then they would start doing it together, and pretty soon that's how improvisation happens. I like that as a way to think about improvisation. When you're improvising, think about how the main melody of the song goes, and maybe think about working on some variations of the melody. Maybe think about coming up with an alternate melody that might work, or something like that. And of course, learn your scales, learn your arpeggios, learn chords, learn chord theory, learn the relationship of pentatonics and arpeggios and scales and all of those things. There's a lot of nerdy stuff to learn, but as you're improvising, I feel like what you want to do is learn all that stuff and then let go of it and just improvise. One of the things I tell my students all the time, practice like a student, but play like a pro. What should I be practicing every day? When I think about how I practice, what I practice, it really varies from day to day. I will tell you that where I start is if I have some gigs coming up, I'm going to look at the songs that I'm going to be performing and working on playing those songs as well as I can. But then along the way, there's also maintenance stuff that I need to keep up, and there's also things that will help me to think about learning and growing. George Van Epps, who's a famous jazz guitar player from the 50s and 60s, was quoted as saying, practice things that are difficult and the easy stuff takes care of itself. I love that way of thinking because over the years, for me, when I practice, I tend to start by tackling the most difficult thing I could think of. And when I'm practicing, I just sound awful. But I've been doing it for so long, I've just gotten used to it. But it's hard to listen to. I don't like practicing in front of other people because of how horrible it sounds. But as it sounds horrible, I kind of feel like I have to sound really bad while I'm working on something I can't do. But the question that was asked was, what do I practice every day? My way of working that out is I have this belief that musicianship can be broken down into three components. The first is head, second is hands, third is heart. Head, hands, heart. The head part is the intellectual component of being a musician. So your ability to concentrate, the knowledge of the song and the chords and the scales and arpeggios and theory knowledge, the ability to maintain a sense of rhythm, and anything like that, anything intellectual would be part of the head component of a musicianship. Hands is the physical coordination to execute whatever it is you're playing. That includes picking, fingering, hammer-ons, pull-offs, whether your guitar is in tune, whether you've got the tone dialed up that you want, anything that has to do with the physical elements of playing an instrument. The third is heart. That's the creative expression. It's the why we play. It's the hardest to really sort of pin down. Part of why is because, as you're practicing certain techniques, there's no button on your pedal that says play with more feeling. Even then, people disagree about what that actually sounds like. What I think about is just the idea that if I've got head, hands, and heart, I believe that I'll be functioning at my current maximum potential if those three elements of my playing are in balance. How do I learn theory without getting overwhelmed? Okay, I'm laughing because the real answer is you don't. The fact remains is that theory is one of those rabbit holes that the more you learn, the more you realize there is to learn, and it only gets worse. If the question is, how do you not become overrun with it? I think my answer is, I was saying this earlier, practice like a student, but play like a pro. And part of what that means is that if I'm home practicing, I'm studying theory, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to understand an element of music that I don't yet understand. But I also feel like while that's really good work to do, it really, in my mind, has no place when you're performing. When I'm performing, I want to be confident in the things that I'm playing, and I'm just going to play what's right there. And I will tell you that if you study the theory, if you give it enough time, it will start to intuitively integrate into your playing without you having to think about it. I think that's the good news. So I think the bad news is that it's uncomfortable to study things like that. It's uncomfortable to just kind of stop playing and think about what the mechanics of it is, particularly on guitar. I read a book a number of years ago that was talking about guitar and chords, and one of the things he was saying was that if you've got 12 frets and 6 strings, that if you work out the math of all the possible combinations of chords, that playing one chord per second, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, would take you over 11,000 years to play every single chord possible. So to me, what that means is that I'm just not going to learn at all. So what I can do is I can learn what I can learn and just don't worry about it so much. Learn more things, just know that it's going to get worse and worse and worse and try to be okay with it. Why do my solos sound like scales? There's an urban legend that a jazz guitar player named Mick Goodrick was giving a seminar at a music college, and she's talking about like all these really different like theoretical concepts and talking about how to reharmonize this and how to improvise this. And if you've heard Mick Goodrick, one of his gifts is that he could really improvise on the spot, and you could kind of hear the logic that he was following. He's just a brilliant jazz artist. Somebody raised their hand in the middle of the seminar, and they asked that very question: why do my solos sound like scales? So the question he asked was, what do you practice? The person who asked the question said, I practice scales. So Mick kind of looked at him and went, I love that answer because it goes directly to the problem. If you're only practicing scales when you're working on your soloing, then when you go to practice your soloing, you're going to play scales. It's because it's what you've been practicing. A great way to practice scales is, first of all, practice the scales up and down, right? So practice the scale up and down. But then, after you practice a little while like that to get sort of familiar with where all the notes are, then maybe start in the middle of the fingering, right? And try to make some melodies in there. Right? Another thing to do is to maybe work on some arpeggios, work on introducing intervals. You know, a great way to start with that is to take a scale and play the scale in thirds. Right? What that does is that starts to get you familiar with the sound. Then your next step might be to just kind of see what would happen if you just kind of mess around with those sounds. Now, I should also tell you that when I'm improvising, I really don't think about scale patterns very much at all. In fact, if anything, what I work on is what I would call ear-to-hand coordination. So the idea is hear the sound in my head and try to have it come out of the instrument without any obstacles. Very difficult to do. I'm still working on it. It's a good ideal. Am I too old to really improve at guitar? So the short answer is no, you're never too old. And I truly mean that. One thing that I found is when I'm working with really younger students, if they're young enough, they really don't know whether something is easy or hard. They don't think about it. They just kind of dive in and do it. And a younger mind seems to be able to internalize things fairly quickly. But an adult student, one thing that they have that the younger student might not have is a sense of work ethic. My job at Berklee teaching guitar students, very often I find myself telling them that, look, if they want to get better at something, they just need to practice it more. In fact, in my own case, what I've found is that I'm often surprised at what I can accomplish if I work hard enough at it. That's the first thing. The second thing is I'm almost always surprised at how long it took. If I think it's going to take me 2 weeks to get something to a point where I really feel good about it, it might take me 2 months or even 2 years. I was watching a clinic with a really well-known guitar player named Frank Gambale, he's a huge influence of mine, just a monster of a guitar player. Now, at the time that I saw the clinic, he was demonstrating something about his technique that he uses this approach called economy picking for managing scales and arpeggios and things like that. And at the time, I had practiced that technique almost exclusively for 2 or 3 years, and I wasn't anywhere near where he was as a player. And I eventually got to a point where I just kind of gave up and went to a different approach. I went to this clinic and I raised my hand and I asked him, I said, Frank, man, I love your playing and your teaching techniques are all like really clear. I get what you're supposed to do, but I've been practicing it, and I just can't do it. And I just wonder, if there's any insight that you can give me to help me improve it. And so the first question he asked is, how long have you been at it? And I said, well, 2 or 3 years. And he says, yeah, it took me almost 10 years before I could get it so that it sounded really good. And I just kind of went, oh, so it's just time. It's just time. When you're practicing, very often the solution is practice more. Got your own burning question about guitar? Drop it in the comments. I might tackle it in an upcoming episode. And be sure to hit the link in the description if you want to dive in deeper with me on TrueFire. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss what's next. See you soon.